the charging and verdict form.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go into the charging of the jury, because I heard some interesting things coming out of there, and I saw you taking copious notes. Can you talk about the charging of the jury?
So before the jury goes back to deliberate, the court will read several instructions to the jury that tell them the law, basically, and what they need to decide or keep in mind when they're deliberating, as well as give them some guidance on what they're going to see on the verdict form, and if they come out one way or the other, what they should check off. If they also let the jury know if they have any questions, do not hesitate to ask, that they will have access to all of the evidence in the case while they're deliberating. And it's a very lengthy process. It's very for the layman, it's very dry because it is all of the law. It lets each element of the case is laid out. It lets the jury know what they need to prove and by what amount of evidence they need, either a preponderance or by clear and convincing evidence. It lets them know the definitions for terms like malice and what that means and what they need to consider. It lets them know what might be actionable or not actionable. In this particular case, there's a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress. And it was pointed out by defendant and then again pointed out by the judge that comments that are made to the general public are not actionable. So that's something that the court should consider when determining if the statements in this case are appropriate to uphold a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Well, I don't have a Black's dictionary in front of me, but can you explain briefly what does preponderance of evidence mean, and how should the jury look at this? Because this is preponderance of evidence. It sounds something people hear every day. Can you explain that?
Preponderance of the evidence is more likely than not that something is true or not true. And clear and convincing, that's a harder one to explain, but it's usually the way we explain it to a jury, is that it's a higher burden than more likely true than not, and so that's kind of the basis. If it's not more likely true than not, then it's not going to rise to the level of clear and convincing.
I heard malice spoke about a lot. Can you talk about what malice means and how it would affect this particular outcome?
This is where defamation gets complicated. There are two different standards of malice in this particular case that the jury needs to consider. The first one is in the defamation action and false light action, and that is basically, I explained it briefly before, it's knowingly saying something that is false or having a reckless disregard for the truth of the false. That's how malice is defined in a defamation case. Then there's malice for what are called punitive damages. That's money awarded to punish the defendant for their actions. And when that's done, you have to decide if the person was acting wantonly or fraudulently or other aspects that are specifically laid out for the jury.
Okay, so the verdict form is basically affirmative or I think the term was not guilty or not guilty, but what was the term used?
So in civil cases, it's liable or not liable, and they have to check off a box according to the judge. I did not get to see the specific verdict form in this case, but according to the judge, for each claim they need to check liable or not liable, and then they'll go through and determine if damages are appropriate or not appropriate, and then if they make that determination, they'll come back and there'll be another portion of the trial held to determine the amount of those damages.
So to be clear, if the jury says not guilty, then everyone goes home. If the jury says guilty, then there's another phase. And how long does the second phase of this usually last?
Yeah, I mean, I would get away from guilty because it's not guilty; it is liable or not liable.
Okay,
financially liable or not financially liable for the damages that they caused. And then what was the question?
The question was, after they rule liable or not liable, then depending upon if it's not liable, then people go home. If it's liable, then it's another phase in this process. How long is that process? Because that's when you get into the damages. How long typically is a process like that? It's not going to be drawn out like the closing, will it? Or sometimes it will be longer?
It's a whole nother trial. So it could be 3 to 5 days. Usually it's a little bit shorter than the liability phase of a trial. But basically you have to prove attorney's fees, if those are going to be awarded, you have to prove the exact amount of damages, and there's some other issues that will come up regarding whether those can be ascertained with certainty or not. So it's a whole nother trial.
Well, guys, there's a lot to unpack. It's from the trial, even to the closing, and to the this is a, you know, I call this the pins and needle phase, where it's the verdict watch. The verdict watch, you know, this is something that this is sums everything up. This is where the jury actually has to come in and say, okay, well, after hearing everything, we either believe the plaintiff or disbelieve the defendant, and they, you know, had to render a verdict. And I don't know. You know, these juries might say, hey, we heard enough, we're going to knock this out today, or they may come back tomorrow. And the other thing that the judge mentioned while he was on the bench was that if they have questions, they can send a note to the judge. That's something typical. It's typical in these type of cases. Can you remember a case that you've had that lasted longer than a day? A case that you had as an attorney?
My most recent case was literally very similar to this case. It was defamation per se. Basically, that means that the statements that are alleged to be defamatory allege either a crime or an unmoral act or things of that nature. And it was a 3 to 5 day trial, and questions came back from the jury. So no, I mean, I've never had a day that I know of.
Right. Yeah. You know, I cover a lot of criminal cases, and usually they last a couple of days. You know, this case, you know, this is a lot different. It's one of the cases that I would say that it will be studied for a while, especially with new age media and digital media. I think it's a case that people are going to look at, especially all the YouTubers that are out there. And I don't know. I think that you as an attorney, how do you view a case like this as it relates to how YouTubers will react in the way they do business?
I don't think that this case doesn't have any legal changing significance. It's not going to change the law on defamation. So those laws have been in place for quite some time. If anything, it might have some shock value, bring, you know, attention to bloggers that they're not immune to the same requirements as journalists or people who work for big conglomerates like TMZ or CNN. I think maybe it might have that effect.
Hey, Harvey.
But other than that, I don't think it's not gonna change or add some news.
Well, I think that even for this particular case, it has exposed a lot about the way Tasha K and K Studios do business with the omissions on the witness stand. It speaks a lot, and I think at the end, people, if they question, you know, the reporting, the transcripts will support or disprove. But I thank you, Ms. Dobbins, for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
And once again, we're on verdict watch, and I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I think you're gonna be here with me too for the verdict, right?
That's right.
Okay. By the way, guys, hit the like button. I know a lot of you out there. Hit the like button, please, and I want you to follow Miss Brittany Dobbins, and all her socials will be on the description box once we're finished. But you want to tell them again for those new people that coming in?
Yeah, so anyone that didn't tune in last time, my IG is at bdobbins, DOBBINS.ESQ for Esquire, and I will see you guys next time.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you.